Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into an internal conflict that I think is, well, it's intensely relatable, it's universal, but it's something we almost never actually say out loud. It's that, that tiny rapid-fire moment of self-condemnation. It just hits you when you're not expecting it at all. I mean, the scenario is super simple. You're just walking, going about your day, maybe you walk past a group of people, or even just one person, and you notice something. A striking feature, a kind of vitality, maybe an aesthetic quality that your brain just registers as beauty, this momentary pause, just appreciation. And then, like instantly, this second thought hits you like a wave of cold water. Wait, all right, from noticing that, is this impure? This is one little observation, maybe shallow, or worse, lustful. And that first moment, the appreciation, it might last a second, but that feeling of guilt, that internal surveillance, that can stick around for a very long time.
And that feeling, that constant self-questioning is exactly what we're here to unpack today. Our deep dive is really focused on why this sense of, let's call it self-condemnation, why it persists. Because the sources we've looked at, they show a really powerful truth. The self-judgment is trained. It is not, an instinctive part of being human. The core confusion, and this is what we're going to try and unscramble, is that we've mixed up three totally different human experiences. We've got aesthetic appreciation on one hand, then biological desire, just a natural impulse, and then this very negative moral idea of lust or lewdness. And we've fused them all into one big ambiguous self-condemning block.
Right. So to try and bring some clarity to this messy internal state, we're going to use two philosophical lenses from the material. We'll be looking at it through existentialism, which is always asking about authenticity in your real experience, and also stoicism, which gives us this just ultimate framework for figuring out what's in our control and what isn't.
And what you should just let go.
Exactly. So let's jump in. Okay, so the social roots of this confusion. The sources hit us with something pretty surprising right off the bat. This guilt. It's not some innate moral compass.
Not at all.
It's trained into us deeply from a very early age, and usually through these really vague but powerful messages, right? From family, from culture.
Oh, absolutely. Things like desire is dangerous, or looking too much is improper.
Yeah, or a truly decent person wouldn't even pay attention to that.
And what's so fascinating is that the problem isn't even the idea of restraint. I mean, we need restraint to live an ordered life.
Of course.
The problem is the sheer ambiguity of that training. We were never taught the actual boundaries between, say, an aesthetic feeling.
Just seeing something beautiful.
Exactly, versus a biological impulse, and then critically, where our own intention actually kicks in. And because we don't have that precise language, this psychological reflex forms, it's self-surveillance.
So you stop looking at the world and you start looking at yourself looking at the world.
You become your own internal censor, judging your own gaze the second it happens.
Which leads to this total paradox in our culture today.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, we live in a world that just relentlessly sexualizes images.
Constantly.
In advertising, social media, movies, I mean, everything.
Yeah.
Vitality and beauty are just everywhere.
They're unavoidable.
And yet the very moment we actually look, our culture fiercely moralizes that gaze.
It's an impossible tightrope, isn't it? We're surrounded by all this stimulus, but we're supposed to be pure in how we respond, as if we don't have senses or a biology.
It's a setup for failure.
It really is. And the source material makes this great point that many people aren't really, sexualizing others. They're being guiltified.
Guiltified, I like that.
Yeah, they just don't have the words to name their own honest human experience. So what do?
They grab the only labels they've been given.
Exactly. The crude binary ones. It's either pure or it's lustful. That middle ground of just, noticing things, it just disappears.
Okay, so that's the root cause, a lack of differentiation. Let's move on and get into the really subtle internal mistakes we make that turn a natural reflex into a moral trial.
Right. So when a natural reaction becomes an instant guilt trip, it's because of these subtle psychological shortcuts. And the first one is really deep-seated. It's the idea of equating seeing with possessing.
But that feels kind of like a survival instinct, though, doesn't it? If I see something beautiful, doesn't my brain just automatically want it? Isn't that the fear?
And that's the key assumption that the sources really push back on. Subconsciously, yeah, a lot of us believe that just acknowledging beauty means you want to consume it or control it, and so you're already morally in the wrong.
Okay.
But the existentialist view just cuts right through that. Recognizing beauty does not mean you desire ownership. I mean, think about it. When you see a stunning piece of architecture or a huge, incredible landscape,
Or hear a piece of music.
yes, you appreciate it deeply. You might even feel this profound connection. but you don't instantly feel like you have to own the building or control the mountain.
So with non-human beauty, we allow ourselves that pure aesthetic appreciation. But because human beauty is tangled up with desire, society just panics.
It panics, and it chooses the simplest route, which is just prohibition. Don't look. It's easier than teaching us how to look without consuming.
Right, how to look without turning someone into an object.
Precisely. Which leads to the second mechanism, and this one is even trickier because it's all internal. It's about moralizing fleeting thoughts.
Oh, this is a big one.
It is. Our brains are just association machines, right? Memories pop up, random images appear, feelings stir, and this all happens before conscious choice.
Before you've decided anything.
Exactly. But the moment that random image flashes in our mind, we rush to shame ourselves. Why did I think that? I must be a bad person.
And this is where the Stoics come in, right? What's their take on that automatic mental noise?
Their distinction is, I think, life-changing. You are not responsible for everything that appears in your mind. The mind just generates stuff.
Like junk mail, as you said.
It's the perfect analogy. You're only responsible for what you agree to hold on to, what you cultivate, what you assent to. If you're not taught that boundary, if you think every flicker of thought is a moral statement from you, then you're living in this state of constant, exhausting shame.
So self-mastery is about managing the agreement, not trying to manage the thought generator itself.
You've got it. Which brings us to the third mechanism. And this one is maybe the most paralyzing. It's choosing suppression out of a fear of losing control.
So the idea that if I even let myself feel the attraction for a second without judging it, I'll just slide down some slippery slope.
Exactly. That fear leads to what you could call learned numbness. People just stop looking. They dull their senses to this stuff. They suppress their ability to feel that vital attraction.
Because they think their self-worth is tied to this absolute ironclad control.
Right. But Stoicism isn't about being emotionally blind. It's about being alert, being fully present with what's happening. And the sources warn that this numbness isn't freedom at all.
It's a lack of trust in yourself.
A lack of trust in your own ability to stop. Real mastery is shown in your ability to consciously stop, not in being too terrified to even start. So if we connect all these dots, we have to talk about the quiet price we pay for all this confusion. And it's deeper than just feeling guilty for a minute. It's a profound estrangement from your own self.
That's a heavy claim.
Yeah.
How does a simple glance get you to self-estrangement?
Well, think about the energy it takes. When you spend huge amounts of your internal resources policing every glance, every little internal vibration, you stop living in the world.
You're just living in your head.
You're living in an internal interrogation room,
Mm-hmm.
and that creates this split, a body consciousness split.
Okay.
Your body, your senses, they register beauty. It's just a biological function. But your judgmental mind instantly steps in, not to guide, but just to suppress. Don't look, don't feel. That part of you is bad.
And living like that, with one part of you constantly policing the other.
It doesn't lead to purity. It leads to numbness or a kind of spiritual hardening, because you're treating a natural part of yourself as an enemy.
And I can see how that has a huge ripple effect on desire itself. I mean, when you forbid the simple act of noticing, desire doesn't just vanish.
Never. It just changes paths. It becomes secretive. It can get driven into extreme fantasy. Or you see these cycles, right? Periods of super strict control followed by
A total release. Binging.
Exactly. Which raises a really sobering question. Are you actually controlling desire this way? Or is desire controlling you through your fear of it? Because if fear is driving the bus, you're not free.
And this has to mess with relationships too. If you can't tell the difference between seeing beauty and lust, you probably swing between two extremes.
That's right. You're either cold and overly cautious because you're terrified of crossing a boundary you don't even understand.
Or you're just reckless because you've already decided you're impure anyway, so what's the point?
Right. But healthy relationships and a healthy relationship with yourself, they require that alertness we talked about, presence, not blindness or paranoia.
So, okay, we've spent this whole deep dive kind of building up to this differentiation. Let's actually define it. What is lust or lewdness? In a real, robust sense, we know what it isn't. It's not just recognizing beauty. So what is it?
At its core, it's about objectification, fundamentally.
Turning a person into a thing.
Exactly. Treating another person as a tool for your own gratification, stripping them of their humanity, their subjectivity. When you inflate that concept to include every natural human vibration, it just consumes everything. It demands you become this sterile, ethical robot.
The irony, like you said, is that the harder you try to be sterile, the more you focus on the very thing you're trying to suppress.
Yeah.
So knowing all this, what do we actually do in our daily lives? How do we break this habit of self-surveillance and move toward conscious choice?
We need strategies that are practical, not just slogans. And they all rely on making these very precise differentiations.
Okay, strategy number 1. This feels like the foundation of it all. Distinguish clearly.
Yes, break down the timeline.
Right. So seeing is just a reflex. Your eyes are open, you notice things.
Can't control it.
Then there's the feeling, that initial pull, the attraction, the impulse. That's also involuntary.
It's a neurological vibration, also not in your control.
Then, and only then, comes intention, which is the conscious choice you make after that feeling shows up.
And that's the only part you're responsible for. The Stoics would say that blaming yourself for the reflex or the impulse is carrying the wrong burden. You're taking responsibility for something that was never yours to control in the first place.
Okay. So, strategy 2. This one feels like the core skill. It's to stay with the gaze, without following.
This is the hard part, especially if you're used to suppression.
So the idea is not to panic and look away immediately.
Yeah.
And not to try and fight the feeling, like it's some enemy you have to crush.
No, you simply register it in full, calm awareness. You just say to yourself, I am recognizing beauty right now. I'm sensing vitality.
And then you stop.
And you stop there. You are practicing the skill of registration without extending it into a fantasy. Mastery isn't proven by avoiding the gaze. It's proven by your ability to look consciously, see what's there, and then choose not to go any further.
That requires a lot of honesty. Which brings us to strategy 3, the existentialist check. Check your reality. So when that self-condemnation hits, you ask yourself, if there were no pre-packaged moral labels for this, what am I actually feeling right now?
And often you'll find it's just aesthetic attraction, a recognition of life energy. Existentialism says you have to prioritize being truthful about your experience over chasing some abstract idea of purity.
Because if you misname it, you can't manage it properly.
You're fighting a ghost, which leads to strategy 4, the Stoic outcome-based approach. Observe the aftermath.
Okay, so after the moment has passed,
you assess, did that look make you lose your focus? Could you return to your task, to your conversation, or did it turn that person into an object that you're now carrying around in your mind?
that's the real test.
That's where ethics actually begins. Not at the moment of seeing, but at the moment you decide whether to cultivate or release the impulse. Your choice defines your character, not the impulse itself.
And the final one, strategy 5, decouple guilt from ethics.
So important.
That sharp, reflexive pang of guilt. It's often just a leftover habit from a clumsy education.
A feeling, not a fact.
Right. So the real question isn't, do I feel guilty? The question is, did I do anything in my thoughts, my words, my actions that went against the values I have chosen for myself?
One is a feeling, the other is a choice. They are not the same thing. So the true promised land here, it's not about achieving some kind of sterile purity where you have no human impulses. That's not the goal.
No.
The freedom the sources talk about is the place where you no longer fear your own gaze.
Because you've learned the art of differentiation. You trust yourself.
It's the difference between being driven by fear and being guided by awareness.
So to recap that core distinction one more time.
If your look doesn't turn the other person into a tool, if it doesn't strip them of their subjectivity and critically, if it doesn't cost you your ability to stop and choose your actions,
Then it isn't lust.
it is not lust. It is simply life recognizing life.
And that difference between recognition and consumption, that's everything. It seems like Stoicism isn't about hating your instincts.
No, it builds virtue on the capacity to choose and differentiate wisely. You find peace when you stop hating the part of you that is human and sensual, and you learn to integrate it with awareness.
So you should probably leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on.
Yes, a slow existentialist question that comes from the material. If you stopped managing your gaze through fear and guilt and just accepted your full sensory self, which gaze in your daily life right now needs to be met with awareness instead of being chased away in fear.